Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne. It's my job to unpack these stories and mental fitness practices of people living top of their game personally and professionally. I am super excited to welcome Topaz on the show. He is the founder of the Skin Deep, an experience design studio that creates the Emmy award-winning web series called The End. The Skin Deep's main focus is using questions as a powerful tool to facilitate intimate conversations and foster deeper human connections. He's definitely come to the right place. Topaz and the team have spent the past 10 years distilling their knowledge and now sharing it more widely with others. This effort culminates with the upcoming release of the book, The 12 Questions for Love, a guide to intimate questions and deeper relationships, which by the time this releases should be out or within a couple days of being out. So can't wait, because I've read the book. Thankfully, have an advanced copy of it. And I mean, you're speaking my language, brother. Questions. So welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Who are you?
So I've listened to a few of your other podcasts. So I've been thinking about that question. And there's obviously a few layers to it, but I think ultimately for me, and this is actually something that I say regardless of if I was on a podcast or not, but if I was with an intimate friend and they really want to know who I think I am, I would say that I feel that I'm a soul who's experiencing these physical realities such that I'm challenged to practice love, to practice sharing love and experiencing love. I think that, like at a fundamental core, I think that's how I see my experience, is that is a soul that's in this physical body, that's in this physical reality, that is being posed with challenges and opportunities and beautiful moments to experience and share love. And it's not always easy, right? So especially when you're having a conflict with someone or something's grinding, that's actually your greatest opportunity to experience or practice love. And what does love really mean? It means the humility to know that you're not alone, but you are alone, right? You come and you leave, but you're not alone. There's other souls you're bumping into, and the act of integration with the other souls is what I think is love. And so in the physical reality, like, what is this guy talking about? Like, yeah, I'm a father right now. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 9-month-old daughter, son and daughter, and that has been a new experience for me. And it's probably the most important one that I'm having now. I'm also a son. My parents are getting older. They're in their, late 70s and mid 80s. And fortunately, they're healthy, but time is inevitable. And in that sense, I'm a son that I'm doing my best to be present and share as much quality time with them and help prepare the space for their transition. And then I'm a husband, right? And that's really important to me. And then in the professional realm, I like to think of myself as I'm doing my best to contribute to the conversations that we have, to the spaces that are created for people to connect.
It's a beautiful, beautiful response. When's the last time you've thought about who you are outside of, knowing that I was going to ask that question? Is that something that you think about or check in with?
Oh yeah. It's, I think, yeah. Yeah, I think about it. I think not a lot, but I think about it often, and it comes up in the form of, where am I living? How am I living? Where am I spending? How am I spending my time? On what? Where is the focus of my energy? A common question that I like to ask people when I'm first meeting them is, what do you do with your most valuable time? Or, not the time that your most valuable time. Your most valuable time, if you're a parent and you're working, might be, the 10 minutes in the morning or that 18 minutes at night before you go to bed and the kids are sleeping. What do you do with your most valuable time? And another one I like to ask people is, where is most of your mental energy? What is the enigma? What is the question that you're spending a lot of time on? And I only say that about me asking people because I also ask that of myself.
Yeah.
And that is a way of me exploring who am I right now? And I'm very conscientious of the names that I give things. So in my life, I'm 47 now, but in my life, for a long time, I was a film director, and I had that title, and I called myself a film director. And then I had this experience at 37 when I realized, well, if I'm a film director, that already puts me in a certain block of what I'm doing. It already tells me what I'm living in the role of a film director. What if I gave myself a different name? If I gave myself a different name and I came up with Storybreaker, and why Storybreaker? Because we all tell ourselves stories, and then something happens. You fall in love, you get divorced, you get hit by a car, you meet the love of your life, you get cancer. Something happens that then breaks your story. Yeah. And as a story breaker, it's like creating opportunities for people to break their story and create new ones. Mm-hmm. And that, by calling myself a story breaker versus a film director, it gave me permission to do an app, an interactive experience, a theatrical show, doing these and series, exploring a retreat, exploring different experiences, and it allowed me to express more of who I was because I gave myself a different name. Yeah. And so I always check in with that. And I don't think I'm a story breaker now. That's been 10 years, and now I'm exploring another thing. And so, yes, I do ask myself that often, and it comes up in the form of, what am I thinking about? Where am I spending my time physically and emotionally and mentally, basically? And in that sense, it's a good way of exploring as we evolve.
Well, it's just the check-ins. And I'm glad you said that, because part of what's interesting in opening the show with the "Who are you?" question, especially when guests come on as repeats, and thankfully the show's been around long enough that there's been people that have been on 3-4 times. It's fun to see, like, I'll go back and listen to how that question was answered. And there's always, there's some staple through lines there, some themes, but it's so beautiful to see the evolution just with one question. And to your point, like, we're always evolving, right? Or at least, for the most part, we're trying to progress. And of course, I think, as a dad myself, with roughly, somewhat similar age children, I really resonate with that. Like, and that in itself, is a massive evolution or chapter, I guess you could say, in our lives. And there's so many other things, but it's interesting. So I have to ask, as you brought up, I forget the exact language, but what is that question that's on your mind right now then that's helping you check in?
I have two main questions. Professionally, the big question is, how can I apply this incredible tool of the and space, which is, the space between of people, and how do you, we have a beautiful tool called the and. It's a format. It's people who face each other. We film them with 3 cameras, and they're asking powerful questions. And we've,
how did that come up? You have to provide that context. Like, okay. Because when you watch it, it's, at first I remember thinking, like, buckle up, like, this is going to be intense, right? But then you quickly get into the emotion of the conversation, and it's almost like the viewer, just like the participants, the walls start to come down.
Oh yeah. So
and that's
for your listeners,
thing.
So for the listeners who might not know what the and is, the and is speaks to the space between, because a relationship is you and I, us and them. It's the and that connects us. So that's why we called it the and. And we manifest that by having people face each other with questions that we give them, and we film them with 3 cameras. And basically, you're always seeing both their faces at the same time. And so when they ask these questions, you're really getting a sense of the space between them, not necessarily what they say, but how they're reacting to each other and their connection. And we've been doing it for 10 years. We've had over 1,200 conversations that we filmed, basically in like over 10 countries. And it came about really in 2014, I was living in New York. I was single. I have a brother I'm fortunate enough to have a brother who's 15 years younger than I. And I realized how we were both dating differently, and because of our engagement with technology, right? This is 2013, and OkCupid was out, and Tinder was out, and texting. And I just saw how he at 21 and I at 36, 37, we were dating and socially relating in different ways because of our connection to technology was so different. And I thought that was an incredible question. The question was, how is the emotional experience of being human shifting?
Oh,
How is it changing? How is it changing? And we as humans are so good at adapting to change that we quickly adapt and don't realize it's always been that way. I don't think love, it's the same word, but I don't think the emotional experience is necessarily the same now as it was 20 years ago and really 100 years ago. Because 100 years ago, you love someone, you'd write a letter. You'd write your heart into the ink of the pen, onto the paper. You'd lick the envelope. You'd put in the mail. You'd wait for a month to get a response. Now you just send a text and you get ghosted in a minute if they don't respond, or 5 minutes, or what. Even the messages we leave, do we really talk to each other? We just leave voice notes. So the emotional experience is different and it's shifting. It's not a judgment call, just the awareness that it's changing. Mm-hmm. And so in 2014, we launched a Skin Deep to explore that question. How's the emotional experience of being human shifting? And we did that by creating different experiences. And the one that's most successful is the and coming back to, so that's how we kind of came around to it. And just to end the loop on the questions I'm thinking about these days is professionally, it's like, how do we apply this tool of the and? The most recent format is the book, which is basically giving the blueprint to people like, this is the power of the and. This is what we've learned for 10 years. This is how you can create the structure and the journey through questions to have a more intimate conversation and ultimately a deeper relationship with the most important people in your life. And the second question I think about in terms personally is just, I'm a father now, I'm raising my children. How do I prepare them? What experiences do I give them? What environments do I put them in to prepare them for a future that's going to be so different than anything I could imagine?
Mm. I mean, that's a question on my mind as well. There's, as you know, and I know you're like the rest of us experiencing the world as it is right now. And there's a lot of heaviness almost all the time. And I think it peaks and it never disappears, but there's definitely peaks and whatnot. And I've been often trying to think like, how do I equip my kids as well with the tools and the curiosity to be able to navigate the uncertainty that will continue to arise in the world, in their lives and so forth. So I'm very interested to see how you've been, thinking about this as well. And maybe we can dovetail a little bit into the work and the questions that might help in this current environment where there's just such a divide across almost everything at this point,
I feel that in the last 20 years with technology and our movement into these social media and our connection to the phone and our information from the phone, I just read a report that something like 18% of young Americans from, basically 18 to 35 are getting, this might not be right, but the point is just that they're getting a lot of information of news from TikTok. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are getting information and news from Instagram. And so technology is shifting how we're getting our news, how we're communicating, and that is shifting our ability to listen.
Yeah.
Because social media is a great tool for you be able to express yourself and put it out there. And then you're regurgitating in these quick hits of dopamine of new information. But what about dropping in and actually listening? And that's a skill set that we're not practicing. And what you don't practice, what you practice, you get good at, vice versa. What you're not practicing, you get weaker at.
Yeah.
And so one thing I've seen through our work of this community for the last 10 years is the power in questions and the power of practicing questions. And most importantly, the power of practicing conversations brought up by good questions. And that's basically what we have, distilled into the book is how do you create the space and what are the powerful questions and how do you construct those questions to have a cathartic conversation?
Yeah.
And what is a cathartic conversation? It's one in which you're listening, you're taking it in, but how do you create the environment where you're actually going to take the stuff in?
Yeah. Well, let's
And then
talk about that.
and B, how do you create an environment where you're actually going to open up and share?
Yeah.
And I just think that as we move into the future, I think it's going to become more, especially with AI and automation and the cognitive things and the execution, implementation of things will become more robotic and automated and left for the computers. Where is the space for humanity and us as humans, right?
Yeah, because we're
And I
pulling
think
the emotion out of all of this.
exactly. And I think how do
Right?
we engage with the emotion? How do we explore the space between? And the space between is you and other humans that are reflecting your experience of being alive, right? They can reflect back to you. So how do you engage in that magical space? Because there's so many nutrients between you in the relationships and the people in your life that I don't think we mine enough. I don't think we engage in that space enough. And when you do, cathartic things happen.
Yeah.
There's so much
So
catharsis.
how do we set that? How do we build that container then to allow ourselves? I mean, this is just stuff that's on my mind given everything that's going on, but you know, to have a conversation, let's just maybe set a bit of context with someone, let's say we love or dear friend, respect, but with, almost polar opposite opinions to world events. Let's just call it that,
Right.
because there's not just one, there's many. But how do we put aside the knee-jerk reaction kind of, situation that we're seeing a lot? I think social media has really put fuel on, right? Versus sitting down and being able to have, a connected, empathetic conversation and just speak, without judgment.
So the first thing is the space, the context. If you go to your wife, if your wife comes to you, your partner comes, why do you love me? Out of nowhere, you're not wondering why you love them. You're wondering, why is this question coming up? What happened? Similarly, if you want to talk to your friend or a family member about something that you have a disagreement with, let's say politics, and you say, why do you think that way? Why do you have such crazy ideas? They're not going to actually create the space to answer you. They're thinking, okay, where's this coming from? They're attacking me. I'm immediately on the defensive. So if we create a space in which we know we're going to explore something, already physiologically, we're starting to relax because we're not being attacked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why, we have these card games, for instance, that, we do. You have a card game is already, it's like, oh, we're playing a game. Boom.
Yeah.
So the question is like, why do you love me? Comes, well, I'm not wondering why you asked me. That's because I know we're playing a game and you randomly chose that question. And that's why we're talking about it. Or, why do we disagree so much and what can we do about it in terms of the friend that has political differences? Well, I pulled out the question and that's why you're asking me that. And okay, now that creates a space in which you can answer or the person can receive. So I think number one is context, space.
Sure.
Oftentimes, if you're going to have a challenging conversation, we need to approach it differently than a normal conversation, right? And the biggest thing to that is going slower. And that's where the kind of, it's not intuitive, or it's not our instinct. When you're going to step into discomfort, you want to move faster because you want to get out of it. And you actually have to go slower. And you actually have to use less blunt tools and more finer tools and make sure you're both using the same words and say, wait, when you say that, what do you mean? Or do you mean this? And we have to approach these conversations in a different way than we do normal conversation.
Yeah.
Right? That's why sometimes people find that when they're on a road trip, they have a great conversation because there's nothing else to do. You're looking out, and maybe you're bored of listening to the audiobook or the podcast or the music, and you have a conversation and there's less distractions and you're there and there's a space created. And I think that's number one, is like, how do you create the space and the context? And that's in the book, 12 Questions for Love. But that's a key component, is how do you create the space?
The other thing I'd picked up, and I'm assuming this is done by design, but I'm looking at one of the graphics right now with the 12 questions that are all displayed. There almost seems to be like warm-up questions as well, right? Like kind of easing into the experience. So, maybe two questions, just explain that flow a little bit. But then the other thing, like I can't help just being, a mental fitness practitioner. Like I can't help but see how something like even doing a bit of breath work together to start off a conversation
Absolutely.
like that could just level set and just like I see it in teams and corporate teams right away within
Absolutely.
minutes. And then we can really get into
Absolutely
some deep conversation.
Absolutely. Well, so to your first question, it's very important. So context in the space is imperative, right? You got to create that. Certain things happen in certain spaces. So that's one. Second is, what is the structure of the questions and how the questions design themselves, how they written out. And so the structure that we have, it is a journey that we take you on. It's almost like a 5-act story structure, right? And from my old days as a film writer. But you start with the past. You start with reminding this. So basically this book is designed for you to have an intimate conversation. Ask these 12 questions and you will have a cathartic conversation, one that will forever change your relationship. Basically, it's a prescriptive, here's the 12 questions, and there's extra questions in the back of the book. And most importantly, this is why it works, so that you can then come up with your own questions. You can then understand the mechanics so that you can apply it to your life. And in terms of the structure, the first 3 questions are about the past. And why do we talk about the past? Because that's what brought you together. That's the thing that connects you. If we're talking about a romantic relationship, it's the things that remind you of what was the first spark. What was the first bonds of trust built upon? Why did we embark on this journey together? And so you're remembering that, and it brings it back into your body, into your physiology, and your mindset. Your heart starts opening up, and you realize the trust and the respect that your relationship is built on, and the good memories that were only created because of virtue of your synergy. And then we start moving into the second phase. The second 3 questions are about conflict. How do we as a pair, intimate or not, romantic or not, handle conflict differently, from hesitant to biggest challenge to what's a sacrifice. So it starts to elevate and it builds up. Now we get to questions 7 and 8. This is the climax. These are the 2 most vulnerable questions. They're really the deepest ones. And mind you, if you don't ask,
you've got to say question 7. I'm just looking at it.
Yeah,
it's a good one.
You want to read it out? You want to read it out?
Yeah. What is the pain in me you wish you could heal, and why? That is such a powerful question that I don't know, even just the way it's worded is disarming in a way as well.
That's it's the structure. And then I said, it's also the construction of the question. I've been doing this for 10 years, my team and I. The construction of the question is really key. Sometimes when we have productions, sometimes I will intentionally make a grammatical mistake in the question, because that gives them subconsciously the permission to say whatever they want to say. If it's like a formal, grammatically perfect thing, question written, then they already feel the formal constraints of that. But if you make a grammatical mistake, there's almost a freedom that's allowed. So the construction is important. And that's why I say, how these questions are constructed is really imperative. But that question is on the individual level, is the pain in me wish you could heal. I think it's a crux of many intimate relationships of connection. And the question is, can someone else heal you? Or can they just hold a space for you to heal? And you need to do the healing, but they hold a space for you. And just illuminating that idea, that thread in your connection, I think is a way of reinforcing your journey or helping illuminate your journey towards healing, whatever that may be. And it's also interesting because the next question, number 8 is, what is one experience you wish we never had and why? Which actually speaks to the collective trauma or pain or vulnerability. Yeah. And sometimes there's a relationship between the two. And that's an interesting thing. So then those are the climax. And then you start what we call landing the plane. 7, 9, 9 and 10 are actually about gratitude, like about acknowledging the learning that we share in our relationship.
Mhm.
Ultimately, this is a person that is walking down the journey of life with you, however long, a mile or two or years or 3 or a block only, but they're
Yeah.
walking that path and they're reflecting to you. And so what are we learning from each other? How are we filling in the blind spots? And just acknowledging that. And then the last two are really, I think, primary questions about life and the temporal nature of the fact that at the end of the day, we're going to die. It will run out of time, if you will. So how do we acknowledge that now and not wait till we miss
Mhm.
that opportunity with the last
Mhm.
two questions? And so this is a complete arc.
A
And
beautiful
obviously
journey.
those two questions at the end, the heart's overwhelming with love generally, because look, at the end of the day, whatever small conflicts we have or whatever, you have taught me this and I have learned this and I love you and I understand. And there's a deeper understanding. And so that's the arc. But I think what you were talking about, breath work, we say at the beginning to start with 30 seconds of silence and looking each other's eyes. Or if that's challenging, holding hands, maybe breathing together, but
Mhm.
ultimately being grounded in the space. And ultimately, at the end of these 12 questions, we find that the pairs, this could be romantic or otherwise, they end up in a similar space, looking each other's eyes, breathing in the same space, being present to each other. But because they've had this conversation, the space between is that much richer. It's that much more illuminated. That's much more alive. There's more
Yeah.
gravitas in that space because we've just gone on this journey. We've just shared a bit through the use of words and our experiences about our relationship. We've illuminated the space between. And that experience is just mesmerizing to watch. It's humbling to hold a space for over 1,200 pairs to do this. And I invite people to do it in their life because I don't think we do it enough. I don't think we take that much consciousness to the relationships in our lives. And here are the tools to do that.
So that was going to be my follow-up question, because there's no doubt anyone that goes through this beautiful flow that you guys have designed, that they will not get something powerful and dare I say transformative in going through that experience. But where my mind goes is the vast majority of the population is on almost like an autopilot to life. There's just a lot going on. People are busy. And and you can probably, appreciate this as a father to young kids as well. It's like all of a sudden, that those hours between dinner and bedtime, or let's just say after bedtime and when we go to bed, are pretty small for a certain period, and that's my current environment. But there's multiple use cases, basically all netting to the same thing. Oh, I just want to sit down and relax for a little bit before, I go to bed. So how have you had conversations with people to, I guess open them up to, hey, if you go through something like this, I think you'll get a lot of value. Like what's been helpful to spark enough curiosity in others to want to do this?
Oh, that's a great question. I would think that's a great question. I would think that your listeners, if they're interested in mental fitness, which is your exploration, fitness is an act that you do to stay sharp, to stay resilient, to stay flexible, right? That is not something you do passively.
Yeah,
It's not,
good point.
it's actively. This is another active practice that's an offering. Now, if they're listening to this podcast, they're already attuned to that. They're already looking for ways to improve their life. I think in general life, I have found is that in work, in relationships, romantic or otherwise, that if, life is always changing. So things are thrown your way. And then because things are changing and thrown your way, there's conflicts. And they could be small conflicts or big conflicts. But when the conflicts come up, our general thing is because it's conflict and there's discomfort, we don't want to face it. So we postpone it. And much like the scar tissue after a surgery or a hamstring that you don't stretch because you don't want to take the time to stretch, it gets
Mhm.
tighter. The scar tissue builds. And then what happens? Your mobility decreases. And then something happens. This is how life, in my opinion, works, is that at some point, something happens. Life throws something at you that requires for you to deal with it. Yeah. And the more scar tissue or the more kind of lack of mobility and flexibility you have, the harder it is, the more pain it is. So when you start realizing, oh, I have that scar tissue, I've got that fear about something. If I actually go and address it now, and I start massaging it or start stretching the hamstring now, it actually makes me more resilient and flexible for the future, so that I'm less painful. Mm-hmm. And so people are wondering, what is this guy talking about? Let me give you an example. You were having a disagreement with your romantic partner. You went to dinner, something was said in public, or you guys had disagreement. They made a decision, they did something, and you're pissed, and they're pissed, and you both know it. And you're like running through the thoughts in your head, and they're running, and you don't want to talk to them because you're angry, you're hurt. So what could you do? You could bite the bullet, bite your tongue and put it in and suppress that emotion. And then what happens? 1 week goes by, 2 weeks go by. That emotion doesn't disappear. Mm-hmm. It stays in there, it festers, it grows. Packed in. And then next thing you know, 3 weeks later, they say something, you explode. When that happens, in terms of the first thing, the longer you wait, the bigger the explosion. No, let's address it now. But how do I do it? I don't want to talk to them. Well, you know what? Just pull out a card game. That's what I do in my relationship with my wife.
Yeah.
It's almost like lubrication. It just makes it easier. She's like, you know what? I'm not going to bring conscientious thought to this. We're just randomly going to choose a card and start talking. And we'll randomly choose another card after that conversation, a second card, and start talking. But it starts getting the gears rolling. It's almost like when you don't want to go to the gym, you're exhausted, you're tired or whatnot. But the most important thing is just get in the gym. Just get there. Yeah. Or
and have the tools around, right? Have the gym bag, have the shoes there. In this case, I think
make it accessible, easy.
Yeah. But I think what's a really important with the example that you provided, that almost probably is like 50% of the battle. But if you have the conversation with your partner in advance that, hey, we have this toolkit here, these cards, and whatever that may be for you, when stuff gets heated, let's just both agree that we're going to pull a card,
Exactly.
In a state where, you're in a loving state and everything's good, right? It's kind of like, I think about going into business with people and working on contracts. Like, let's figure out the terms while everyone's happy and not wait for, this big event to happen. Then now all of a sudden we need to figure out how we're going to navigate through this, right?
Are we provided the toolkits to access the relationships in our lives in a simple way? Are we taught? Who teaches us how to manage our relationships, how to have conversations? We're not taught that. I don't think we're taught that in schools per se. You're learning it from your parents. You're learning it from other relationships you see. We don't get tools. And that's what we're offering, right? The skin deep through our experiences and the book and the card games.
Wild.
It is wild.
No. You don't know why I'm going to say it's wild. It's wild because I think of how your book opens. How, little Topaz, who's I think 4 years old, is jumping into contract law in the car essentially, because if the divorce that your parents had gone through, and I was just thinking of I have a 7-year-old, like I don't think he would do something like that, or maybe put in that position that would surface. But it's so interesting that like at a young age like that for you, it's almost all come full circle. Like you started there, helping kind of put some terms on relationships. And now you find yourself doing this day in and day out on a pretty significant scale.
I think I'm 47 now. It's taking me, I don't think I fully realized that full circle until 4 years ago.
Okay.
Right. Where basically the pain, that's, deep sense of pain, witnessing your parents' divorce and being the mediator and going back and forth every week and every week trying to be a referee and trying to figure out why this happened at 4. Mm-hmm. And it's not exaggeration. I was in preschool
Yeah.
And that pain has led to a hunger for intimacy and connection, which has now evolved into a gift. And that gift is what I'm offering. And that gift has come from the 10 years at the end, and now in the form of the book, 12 Questions for Love. So in that sense, it's a beautiful journey for me personally, but I also think that journey exists. I think that journey exists for everyone. And so that's why I say the path of growth is lit by fear and pain, like wherever, or discomfort, wherever it appears, pursue it. Because that's the journey of growth. That's where you can go. And then hopefully you can convert some of the pain that you experience, becomes a hunger to explore something, into a gift.
Yeah.
Now, that's my experience. I'm not saying that's ultimately true or not, but for me, it's been true. And I would just like to offer that to your readers and anyone I speak to.
So what happened 4 years ago that allowed the circle to connect?
So I did a retreat that we call Grace, where I brought 18 people custom made for this physical space in nature with people. And it was basically exploring the stories of our lives. And I called it to the impetus was, look, these 18 souls, we're here together, but we're going to take a intermission from life. And we're all souls. So let's share the trail notes of our lives as souls. And this was the third one that we'd done. Oh, no, actually, this was the first one. And I remember telling my story. So basically, everyone gives up and they tell their story. And it's for a length of time. Hourglasses here, sunglasses in the back. And I used one of them. And you basically step into the space of telling the story of your life from that moment. And of who am I, right? Who are you?
Yeah.
And I played back how my experiences, the key word was divorce. And for most of my life, divorce was a source of pain, a lot of pain. And it was always, and at this point I was marrying my wife, or building a family with my wife. And I remember having a conversation with my dad saying, this is my space now. You've raised me enough. Now you witness it and cherish it, but you can no longer meddle. I'm no longer your child in that sense. And my father said, well, okay, so this is a divorce. Like, you're divorcing us, right? And I said, yes, it's a divorce. And as I told that story in the space of the retreat, right? So I was telling the people the story of my life, and I was telling them this story, and I just said the word divorce, and my father responded that way. And one of the participants looked at me and he says, amazing. So divorce was a source of pain for you as a child. And now divorce actually means freedom and individuation. And that's, I spent a little time meditating on that path, and then also writing the book. Writing the book when we were asked, Topaz, would you like to write a book that encompasses it? I had to go in and look into how did I get this path? And how did I fall into this beautiful format of the and? What was it that drove me there? And what were the things that informed me? So it's about those two things.
Yeah. You've done so many different experiences. I mean, it's like you said, it's been 10 years and just so many beautiful, conversations and connections and so forth. I have to ask though, are there, without thinking too deeply, are there a couple experiences that you witnessed that you're just incredibly proud that you're able to facilitate and hold space for whatever transpired?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. It's the greatest honor. Other than my kids, it's the greatest honor I've had in my life, that people are willing to step into our space and share their vulnerabilities and their life experiences and their relationship on camera in our space. It's a great deal of responsibility that my team and I feel, and it extends all the way into the way that we edit the pieces, to how we title them. We're not going for the best. We're going for the long term. We're not going for the BuzzFeed views. We're not going for the views on YouTube. We're not, it's an honor and it's a responsibility, and we don't take it for granted, my team and I. And one thing, one comes to mind of a story that just recently happened in November. we did a very special production for the book where we asked all the 12 questions for the book, and we had pairs come in, and one couple are Laura and Brad. And Laura and Brad been married for 22 years. And he is a Marine vet for 14 years. And December of 2022, their son was 18 in college, and he went to take a shower and he died in the shower. And they don't know, to this day, they don't know why. It was not drugs. It was not a heart attack. I mean, the kid didn't do drugs. He was an artist. He was incredible. And he just died in the shower just like that. And they don't know to this day what happened. But they were, this is probably definitely the most, this is, I think, emblematic of, for me, what keeps my team and I going are stories like this, because they were going through, as you could imagine, through so much grief. Mm-hmm. And she needed to talk and connect. And his way of responding to too much was overwhelmed to just take a drive, as they told me. Every time she wanted to talk, he didn't have time to talk. He'd have to go for a drive because it was so big, could imagine.
Yeah.
And they said that they came across the healing deck. And the healing deck created that space, if you will, for them to start having the conversation, just to start to move the muscles, to stretch it, and have the conversation. And then Laura told me that really saved their marriage, their connection. And then they stepped into the space to have the and if it's not already on YouTube, it will be. But they had the courage to share their grief and their learning about life and what life offers you in the face of losing a son, a child. It just, I was bawling just because I was obviously put myself in those shoes. What happened if my son died when he was 8? I'm bawling, and they had the courage to step into the space and share. And I asked them why, and they said, well, because when it happened to them, some people reached out who had a similar experience and said, okay, remember to eat, remember to drink, remember to get out of bed, because the first 3 days they didn't even get out of bed. Mm-hmm. But that information helped them. Yeah. And by them doing the and sharing their experience will undoubtedly help other people who are going through similar experiences. Yeah. And that's why I find the question I think professionally is, how do I apply this incredible tool that mines the connection between people, the nutrients, the stories of our lives, to amplify it so that other people can have access to it, so that they can deepen their own experience of what it means to be human.
Do you think that they're able to find, I haven't seen obviously the conversation, but able to find a certain element of closure?
I don't think they'll ever find closure. I think they found, I don't know what they find. It would be good to ask them. I think what I witnessed was first, I was incredibly honored that they trusted us to step into the space to begin with.
Yeah.
But I just witnessed an incredible amount of grace and humility and vulnerability. Of acknowledge. There's one question said, "What do you think that I posed? What do you think life is teaching us?" And Brad responds, "Life is teaching us not to take it for granted." And so why are we taking and so I asked that extends to me in the context of this conversation is not to take life for granted, but let's not take the relationships in our life for granted. Mm-hmm. They're there for a reason. They're there as mirrors to reflect us back to us. And we are there to reflect others to themselves. And we can choose how we want to reflect back. So how do we put ourselves in the spaces and use the tools to reflect, to share, to illuminate the threads that connect us, to illuminate this experience? It's called life that we have. And just not to take that for granted.
I mean, just in that, I can't help but go full circle with how we open some of our conversation around having challenging conversations where there are different points of view and whatnot. And if you approach those situations with this perspective of not taking life and relationships for granted, and I mean, full circle again, how you answered who you are, if you approach those conversations with love, that's a very, very different tone to asking some questions to understand and empathize and seek to find some, common ground and let the relationship foster to wherever it needs to go.
Absolutely.
Wow. What do you want
Absolutely.
people to, or what do you hope people will get and out of the book once it's in people's hands, and how do you want them to feel after they've experienced the book in the flow of the questions?
This will date me, but do you know when you had that experience where it doesn't happen so much anymore because we're on our phones so much, but one example would be you're in a taxi cab and you have this epic conversation with a taxi cab driver and you come out, you're like, oh my God, that that resonated with my understanding of humanity. Like, wow, that was a beautiful moment. Where you're walking down the street in New York and you see something that's amazing. And the person who's walking down, going to wherever they're going, is 4 feet away and they're walking down the same direction and they see it too. And then you both look at each other and you just nod. Or you're with your dad or your wife or your husband or your best friend and you both see something and you both blurt out the same words at the same time. And that's a little bit superficial, but that idea, that connection of, wow, we just illuminating humanity, that deep sense of humanity that's in us that comes about when we connect, which to me is love.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it is for me. It's this integration of two souls and they realize that, wow, we feel that sense of connection and that depth. And I think that this is one way to access that, is having these conversations. But then how do you create the space for it? And then what are the questions that you asked? And those things, that tools is in the book. So ultimately, I want people to come out and have these experiences, cathartic, and go, oh my God, I've known this person for 3 years. We've never had this conversation. I never knew that about them. I didn't realize that about me. I guarantee you, if you have this conversation, you will have those illuminations or those understandings of yourself and others, or the person in your life. You go, wow, it's been 3 years. We never knew that. And then ultimately, I can do it again. It's like you just rode the bike the first time and you realize I can ride it again. And I can take this bike wherever I want to take it. It's not a one-off thing. That's what I want people to get. That's what I want people to feel, but I want them to get the skill so they can put it in their lives. Because ultimately, if we explore the relationships in our lives and take it with more gratitude and practice deeper connection, what's going to happen to the world? It's going to extend into the other relationships in our lives. It's going to make the world just a little bit better.
Yeah, the ripple effect.
Yeah.
It's the words that come to mind is just first seeing, but then appreciating that space between, and firing up beautiful curiosity to your point. Continue to explore that. Oh wait, there's more space there. That now you're approaching it from excitement and a sense of adventure. Which is very different than saying, okay, these are important questions. We should really speak and let's set some time to sit down and, we'll get something out of it, of course, but there's just a different tone or flavor to that context versus like this, let's go on the adventure and see what's there. Right?
Exactly. This is, it turns out sometimes to be heavy, but it doesn't have to be at all. You could have a fun, explorative conversation here while you're driving in the car, while you're washing dishes. It's not, it doesn't have to be it's not meant to be a heavy thing. That's actually the beautiful thing, is that it might end up and touch on heavy spaces, but actually is exploratory. It's fun. And there's no winners and there's no right way to do it.
Oh, beautiful. I mean, I think we probably knew this from the very first time we spoke, but we could definitely continue for many more minutes, if not hours, on this topic. But I want to respect your time, and I want to thank you for, first and foremost, for for coming on the show, but a higher thank you to you and not just you, but also the team over
Thank
the
you.
last 10 plus years
Yeah.
for putting in just such beautiful work that has such exponential and ripple effects around the world that there's probably so much that you don't even see that has come from the work that you're putting into this world. And I hope that lands in the hearts of yourself and the team. And I know it has for me, just knowing what you are all doing out there. So just
Thank
sending
you.
a bunch of love. And I hope this is the first of many conversations we have as our paths cross.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you having me and my team, but having our work. Thank you.